Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, here with your off-season edition of the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion. Have a new title, page, intro, graphic, whatever you want to call it. Special for this year. That is Hurricane Isabel in the background as seen from the International Space Station back in 2003. Just wanted to change things up a little bit for this year. So this is the ongoing off-season edition of the Outlook and Discussion, where I talk about some of the key features in the tropics that we will be watching as we anticipate the upcoming hurricane season for the Atlantic. And then I'll look at some lower 48 weather conditions, namely and specifically the flooding situation in the southeast Texas area, which has been, of course, very serious. I will get to that momentarily. First of all, you notice if you've been watching these off-season videos, and this is really a reason why I do them, because we can track this stuff on a weekly basis. I try to do these at least once a week throughout the 6 months of there being no hurricane season, even though we had Hurricane Alex back in January. That notwithstanding, we usually have 6 months of quiet, and we like to look at things, the bigger pieces of the climate puzzle, as I like to call them, that help to shape the upcoming season. And one of those would be the state of the ENSO, or the El Nino Southern Oscillation. Is it El Nino? Is it La Nina? Is it neutral? Well, as you know, the last several months we have had a very robust El Nino, or abnormal warming, here in the Pacific, and that is now starting to change. And you can see in the eastern Pacific what we call the Nino 1 and 2 regions really starting to cool off here as cold water from the subsurface is coming up to the surface, and we call that upwelling, and it's starting to really cool off pretty substantially right here around the Galapagos Islands. And then throughout the rest of the tropical Pacific, if I can say it, you see this little band of yellow showing up, getting closer and closer to neutral with that, and we've lost pretty much all of the deep reds that we had earlier in the season. At the same time, notice what's happening here in the Atlantic, warming up in the deep tropics to half a degree or so above the long-term average, while the North Atlantic up here remaining very cold relative to average. We can take a look at that on this graphic. Very cold up here west of the Iberian Peninsula near the Azores. And there was some speculation and talk from Dr. Phil Klotzbach, who I got to hear from firsthand at the National Tropical Weather Conference this past week in South Texas, South Padre Island to be specific, that this colder water could make its way down along the west coast of Africa, and then if we have some robust trade winds coming across, it could filter into the main development region, or the deep tropics, and cool things off. Well, that so far hasn't happened too much. Yeah, there's a few cold anomalies sitting in here, but we have certainly seen colder. And I'm going to tell you what, if it doesn't come to pass, and this starts getting eroded away, and this kind of fills in with more warm water, which is what some of the computer models are indicating for sea surface temperature forecasts, then the upcoming hurricane season could be quite busier than Phil Klotzbach's forecast indicated. And we're going to go over that in just a moment. So let's go back to the Pacific for a moment as well. This is the subsurface updated on April the 8th. They seem to be having glitches where every other frame, I think these are a week to 10 days apart or something like that, that they do these snapshots, are ending up with no data. So this is the most recent one that I'm able to get from April the 8th, but nevertheless you see a large area of cold subsurface water and only a thin strip of positive anomalies remaining, and this is setting the stage for what is likely going to be a fairly substantial La Nina, or abnormal cooling of the tropical Pacific, as we get through the remainder of 2016. Looking at the actual sea surface temps, the Gulf of Mexico, this will be one of the first places to watch. The Southwest Atlantic, the Northwest Caribbean Sea, this region, as we get into May and June, which is not too far away. So things are starting to warm up as we would expect. Each one of these isotherms in here, 26 degrees Celsius, or about 79.5 degrees Fahrenheit. So you can see the Gulf warming up just as it should. Maybe a little bit above normal in some areas, but nothing alarming. And as I have said many times, the Gulf will always, with the exception of 2010, it was pretty cold relative to average in 2010. But normally the Gulf is going to support very intense hurricanes in any given year. It's just interesting to track the progress of the warming of these things. And you notice the loop current in here alive and well, and that'll be something that we have to watch when and if something comes through this area. Looking at the western Atlantic and the east coast mid-Atlantic region, right up against the Outer Banks here, the southern parts of the Pamlico Sound and just offshore on the other side of that thin strip of land. Quite warm. I guess if you wear a wetsuit it would be comfortable. Almost 70 degrees, maybe a little higher than that, butting right up against the Gulf Stream. But then down here closer to Wilmington off the coast of Topsail Beach, and then Myrtle Beach, and farther south from there. Or is it further south? I think it's farther when you're talking about distance. Anyway, water temperatures warming up, in the mid to upper 60s. By the time we get to June, it'll be nice and warm for people to enjoy the beach. And you notice, last year we had this ridiculously cold water up in the extreme northwest Atlantic. Some areas were close to 0 degrees Celsius. And you look right here, that's a 7, so +7 Celsius up here. Still too cold for me, but warmer than last year for what it's worth. So there you have it. All right, well, let's look at the seasonal forecast from two different universities. I thought this would be interesting. Dr. Phil Klotzbach and his team, including special assistants from now, unfortunately, the late Dr. William Gray. He passed away just a few days ago. What a pioneer in climate science for hurricane seasonal activity. A lot of people gruff about it and say, well, there's no really need for it, but you got to start somewhere. Trying to figure out where hurricanes are going to go, if that could be solved even weeks in advance, and this could lead to that, is obviously very helpful, and you have to start somewhere. If someone said 50 years ago that we're going to have numeric models that run 4 times a day that can tell you what the weather's going to be out for the next week with pretty reasonable accuracy on a global scale, they'd probably think you're a moron, that there's no way that can happen. Somebody had to start, and hey, it worked for that pretty well, right? Especially 3 to 5 day forecast for normal weather. And so his work, Dr. William Gray, has certainly led to that, and I think we will learn in the future how much he truly contributed to the science. So his protege, one of many, but the one that stands out the most is Dr. Phil Klotzbach here, and he is the lead author on the seasonal forecast. You've probably seen this recently. I just want to kind of recap for you here in this box what the summary is, including Alex, which happened in January. Remember that? A total of 13 named storms, with 6 of those storms becoming hurricanes. We've already had one. See right there, one named storm. It became a hurricane. It wasn't a major hurricane, luckily. So we're expecting to have, from Colorado State anyway, 2 of those 6 hurricanes becoming major hurricanes, or Category 3 or higher, with a total ACE value of 93. Now that's not 93% of something. That's the score. That's like saying, the Spurs and the Warriors are going to play tonight, and we feel like the Spurs are going to score 93 points. Their average might be 101, just making that up off the top of my head. So 93 would be a certain percentage of the average, 101, right? Whereas in this case, 93 happens to be almost right on top of the long-term average for seasonal ACE. And why is that important? Because the accumulated cyclone energy really helps to measure how much energy the tropical cyclones of a given season put out. You could have 14 named storms. They're mostly weak and short-lived, and you have a low ACE score. Conversely, a season like '04, with around 14 named storms, whatever it was, you had some of them, Ivan, whose ACE, accumulated cyclone energy, for that one hurricane was larger than some of our entire hurricane seasons of the past 3 years. So there you go. That's why ACE is important. All right, so recapping, 13 total, 6 hurricanes, 2 majors. So let's look at what another university says. This may not have gotten as much press. It did here in North Carolina, where I am. This is from North Carolina State University, up the road from me in Raleigh, and they are suggesting an active season, so a little bit more activity than Colorado State is suggesting. If we look down here, the lead author is Dr. Lian Che. I have met him a while back, 1997, when I was doing some research on storm surge, which has led to a lot of the projects that we have accomplished since then. So his group at North Carolina State suggesting 15 to 18 named storms forming, 8 of 11 becoming hurricanes, 3 to 5 of them becoming potential major hurricanes. So this is a substantial step up from what Dr. Klotzbach and Colorado State University are forecasting. Who's going to be right? Well, we'll know on November 30th, won't we? So again, let me just point out one thing. I suspect that if this fills in and this gets warmer through here especially, and the La Nina really kicks in, and we keep an eye here especially on the eastern Pacific, and this is cooling pretty substantially now. If all of these things continue, and I mean, look through here, this is not bad. This is fairly warm compared to average. The colder water is right up here around 20 north. A lot of our tropical waves are going to come off south or just over the Cape Verde Islands. So who knows, maybe the NC State forecast could be the one closer to the mark. For what it's worth, the Colorado State University forecast will be updated several times, and I know people scoff at that as well, but it helps to fine-tune as more data comes in. The April outlook is simply a preliminary guess. They know there's a lot of uncertainty with it. Stay tuned, and it helps to keep people's attention focused on tropical cyclones, which I think is a good thing as a whole, because then people can't say they were caught with no warning. I don't want to hear that BS ever again. All right, moving on. Lower 48 weather, luckily, since we have so much going on, unfortunately, down in southeast Texas, not much going on elsewhere. Pretty windy conditions up here in the northeast, and so that's a red flag warning. Low humidity values, the possibility of brush fires, etc. So here in Oklahoma, from all that rain, and then here in southeast Texas, lots of problems associated with that. I want to focus real quick on the Houston area, not to ignore southern Oklahoma, but this is a pretty big population center here, and you see the rainfall was just ridiculous in and around the Houston area. We set up a couple of our unmanned cameras in that region on Brays Bayou where it crosses Rice, and then over at South Maid Creek where Greenhouse goes by in the Houston area. And so this is the forecast for some of the different rivers. The San Bernard River at East Bernard looking like it could go into major and maybe even breaking the record by just a little bit here. And all of this, by the way, you can find by going to weather.gov, weather.gov, put in your zip code, and then just look for the information. It's all in there, river flood warnings, etc. Then the San Bernard near Bowling, probably said that wrong. My apologies. Major flooding forecast, minor right now, major is forecast. And you see there's a couple of peaks going on here. These forecasts from the West Gulf River Forecast Center. And then the Colorado River down at Wharton. And hopefully that's how you say that, Wharton. And it's forecast also to go into major and stay there for a few days. No flooding is occurring now, but major is forecast. So that's a big problem. We may have to examine this. My colleague Carrie, who is in Houston, we do have a camera system that we can put out for that, potentially, kind of like we did at Deweyville. But we have to see if it would make sense, if it would be helpful, and if it's safe to do so. And then finally, the Colorado River at Columbus. Very sharp rise, as you can see there, with that incessant, incredible rainfall rate that we had the other night into yesterday. And so the little bit of a secondary rise into major, staying into major over the next little while. So a lot going on in a relatively small geographic area of the country here with lower 48 weather. But this is a big population area. Houston, 4 million plus people, major commerce, travel, oil industry, you name it, all of that affected by rainfall. And I want to mention, this is a great opportunity for people to remember tropical cyclones are not just about the category that they're given when they're a hurricane, for example. Allison in 2001, for the people in Houston who were there for that, that's the benchmark and the poster child of freshwater flooding from tropical systems. And this event, not tropically related at all, is a reminder of that, however painful. And as we approach hurricane season, we need to be pushing impact, not just wind. And, oh, it's a 60-mile-an-hour tropical storm, I'm not going to worry about it. And then 25 inches of rain falls in and around your area. Not only are you worried about it, but then you complain that you were caught without warning. You need to know ahead of time about these impacts. And freshwater flooding with excessive rainfall as the culprit is a big part of that. So keep that in mind. That's my safety tip and preparedness advice for the day. All right, well, we covered a lot. I appreciate you tuning in as usual. Starting in May, these forecasts will start, or I'm not do forecasts, sorry, these outlooks. No, I am not a forecaster. These outlooks will become more frequent, and then in June, they'll become pretty much daily, except when there are periods of time where there's absolutely nothing happening, and I might want to take a day or two off to enjoy the beach or something. So we're going to start increasing these gradually as we get towards the hurricane season. And one other point, the East Pacific season begins on May the 15th, so that's coming up, and I will be doing outlooks for that region as well. All right, have a good rest of your Tuesday. Again, thanks for tuning in. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com, and I'll talk to you next week.